reviewing all submitted incident reports that non-public schools are uploading to the incident report module. As part of that review, we're doing procedural reviews that include looking for the required elements on the incident report, in addition to whether incident reports were uploaded, were provided to the LEA, to the student's parent or guardian, and also various other elements. One of the things we wanted to make sure that we reiterated is that regardless of that incident report review processes, there are larger behavior support and incident reporting and emergency behavioral intervention requirements, including the 10-day IEP follow-up meeting. Now, we've done previous webinars where we've covered this, so some of this is going to be repeating old ground. But again, given some of what we've seen in our incident report reviews, we wanted to make sure that for those of you who are unfamiliar with it or who are new, and as a refresher to those who've heard it before, that we cover it again. First, let's look at positive behavioral supports and interventions. We see from the DCMR 2814.1 that in looking at a student's behavior, if that behavior impedes their learning, IEP teams should be considering on a regular basis the use of positive behavior supports and other strategies. Furthermore, if the student's behavior that impedes their learning isn't addressed in the IEP team should be reviewing and revising that IEP to make sure that there are appropriate positive behavior supports and strategies. And again, we see this come up when we're doing response to incident investigations where there's been some concerns, and we see that a non-public student may not have a comprehensive positive behavior intervention plan that's addressing particularly problematic behaviors or new and emerging behaviors that come up. Those behavior plans should be individualized for a student's particular needs, and there should be some integration or utilization of a school-wide positive behavior support program as well. In looking further into 2814, and this is the subsection point 2, non-publics must ensure that their programs are in compliance with the IDEA disciplinary policies and related safeguards. In particular, when decisions are being made about discipline and changes in placement or suspension, those decisions should be informed by IDEA policy, but also by the supports that are provided to students with regard to their interventions. Specifically, when determining whether there should be a change of placement, a student is terminated from or is no longer going to be receiving services at the non-public school, whether that is formally designated as a suspension or a termination of enrollment. Again, non-public schools should be working with their LEAs to determine the appropriate kind of change of placement, that is, the student no longer receiving those services at the non-public school, and to ensure that it's compliant with the procedures consistent with IDEA and our DCMR regulations. Now let's move on to restraint and seclusion follow-up. So what follows, for students who have BIPs, behavior interventions in place, who are able to, their behavior escalates to the point where there's an emergency behavioral intervention that is implemented, whether it's authorized based upon the student's IEP, where the use of a restraint or seclusion has been included and there's been a BIP that's been created. In those instances, the IEP team does not have to specifically meet within 10 days of the incident. However, when there is no authorization of the use of a restraint or seclusion, and there's not a BIP in place, IEP teams shall be meeting within 10 days of each incident to consider the need for an FBA or BIP. So again, there's some nuance here in terms of the language. It's to consider the need for an FBA or BIP, and also to discuss non-physical and non-restrictive de-escalation strategies. So again, it's to consider the need for those things. The IEP meeting notes should document that the IEP team did make some consideration. So what that may look like might be IEP meeting notes that indicate that the BIP was reviewed and was either modified to address new concerns or new approaches to managing the behavior, or that the IEP team determined that the BIP as it currently exists was appropriate, or that an FBA is not needed at the time. Really to document that the IEP team considered strategies to address a student's behavior. If the student has a BIP in place, the IEP team shall review and revise as appropriate. So in looking at the non-physical interventions, what we're looking at is what did the staff do to de-escalate the student's behavior before the restraint was implemented? Oftentimes when we're reviewing incident reports, it's not entirely clear what precipitating factors occurred and also what activities or interventions the staff was able to implement before needing to go hands-on with an emergency behavioral intervention. Some of those strategies might include verbal de-escalation or other kinds of de-escalation techniques, active listening, directive statements, proximity control. But realistically, there are going to be times, and OSSE recognizes that there are going to be times when, due to the urgency or the immediacy of the situation, that de-escalation strategies before a student was restrained or secluded may not be appropriate. And again, that's laid out in 2816.1. However, it should be clearly documented in a way in which, as we're reviewing incident reports, that's obvious that there was not the ability to implement any kind of de-escalation before going hands-on. So again, going back to holding that IEP meeting, again, this is a reiteration. There is more specific detailed guidance, and in the interest of time, we'll direct you to that guidance, both in terms of positive behavior support, but also in terms of looking at the requirements for the IEP follow-up meeting, really kind of drilling that process down to make sure that non-public schools are aware if they are going to add a restraint or seclusion as a potential intervention for students who are having, multiple chronic kind of incidents, the requirements for doing that in a way that's compliant with the regulations, which includes having a BIP in place, being able to identify the specific behaviors under which the restraint or seclusion would be used, and also identifying the types of pre-restraint or pre-seclusion interventions that will be attempted beforehand. So in the interest of time, we won't cover that in depth, but we really want to make sure, as we're reviewing incident reports, we're now into what, Sharon, our third month of reviewing for this particular school year, that we're conveying to non-public schools the expectation that these IEP meetings should be happening. Here's a flow chart that really looks at the IEP follow-up meeting process. So does the IEP authorize the use of a restraint or seclusion? If no, then a 10-day meeting needs to occur. If the IEP authorizes the use of a restraint or seclusion, does the student have a BIP? Again, if no, then an IEP meeting needs to occur. But if yes is the answer to that question, does the IEP team authorize the use of restraint or seclusion under specific situations and conditions? No, then again, an IEP team needs to meet within 10 days. However, if the IEP team has authorized the use of restraint under specific circumstances and conditions, And the answer is yes. Is the behavior requiring the use of that emergency behavior intervention identified in the BIP? The answer is no. An IEP meeting must occur within 10 days. However, if the answer is yes, then it would be deemed appropriate use of inclusion of restraint or seclusion in a student's IEP, provided that they also had a BIP. So that's all the information we intended to cover in this section. Why don't we stop and take a look and see if we have questions. We'll be right back. So it doesn't look like we have any very specific questions. There's a few individualized questions that I think require some additional follow-up. We're going to stay on the line for another 2, 3, 5 minutes or so. If there are questions for this particular section, we're happy to answer those. Again, for the other sections, my colleagues have left, and what I'd like to do is to, circle back with them, and we will be following up with providing more specific and detailed answers to questions in an FAQ document, or if they're very individualized questions, my colleague's been answering some of those now, but we will get back to you on those questions as well. So we'll take a pause for the next 3 to 5 minutes to see if there are any additional questions in this section. Otherwise, we will look to sign off. Okay, looks like we don't have any more questions, so we will just wrap up with resources and contact information. So my colleague Jason Campbell, so here's the information that he was referring to before. For additional assistance, the OSSE DOT Resource Center, which is the second number, 202-576-5000, that's the parent resource center that Jason was referring to before in terms of being able to convey concerns about ride times or even bus challenges. So that information is here. You can also visit the web link that's here for more information about student transportation. for my colleague, Rita Larkins in DAR, Data Assessment and Research. Here's her contact information. And again, we'll be sending the full slide deck out, which has the live links to, our resources and policies that are included in this presentation. And then finally, for the non-public monitoring team, here's our contact information. So again, we'll be sending out a full copy of the slide deck, along with information on the current assignments of the non-public monitoring team for each of our non-public schools, and also for the LEAs as well. So for LEAs to be able to convey their concerns about, their students attending non-public schools. And finally, we'll be sending out information about the various user type roles in SEDS, so that as non-publics are requesting aggregate assets or new accounts for their staff members, they can be informed by the kinds of roles and activities that they would be engaging in, so that they can make the appropriate request to LEA SE POCs for user types. Okay, so with that, we thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to our next webinar or our next training in the spring, and we'll be in touch with you soon. Thank you, and have a great day.